You know, they say that your 65th birthday is supposed to be a celebration of life, a milestone worth cherishing. But as I stood in my kitchen that morning, watching the gray October sky through the window above my sink, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. My name is Margaret, and I've spent the last 40 years of my life building what most people would call a comfortable fortune. Not billions, mind you, but enough to ensure that my 3 children would never have to worry about money again. My late husband Robert and I had worked tirelessly, he as a civil engineer, me as a real estate developer, to create a legacy that would outlast us both. The house was already buzzing with activity by 8 in the morning. My daughter Claire had arrived from Boston the night before, her designer heels clicking against my hardwood floor as she inspected every room like she was already measuring for new furniture. My son David drove in from Chicago that very morning, his expensive suit wrinkled from the long drive, but his eyes sharp and calculating as always. And my youngest, Patricia, had flown in from Los Angeles, her perfectly styled blonde hair and camera-ready smile masking something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Mom, you really should consider updating this kitchen," Claire said, running her manicured fingers along my granite countertops. "These cabinets are so dated." I smiled politely, stirring my coffee. "I like them just fine, dear." But Claire wasn't really talking to me. She was talking to David, who was leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed, taking mental notes. Patricia was on her phone, probably posting something about being home for Mom's special day to her thousands of Instagram followers. You see, what my children didn't know was that I'd been watching them, really watching them. For months I'd noticed the way their visits had become more frequent, more interested, the way they'd ask about my investments, my properties, my will, the way they'd exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. As I prepared for what I thought would be a lovely family dinner, I had no idea that by the end of the night, I'd discovered just how little my own children actually knew about the woman who raised them. The dining room table was set with my finest china, the set Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the mahogany table, and I'd spent hours preparing everyone's favorite dishes: prime rib for David, salmon for Claire, and Patricia's beloved lemon cake for dessert. But as we sat down to eat, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. None of them were really looking at me. They were looking at the house, at the expensive artwork on the wall, at the crystal glasses in their hand. They were calculating, and I was just there. "So, Mom," David began, cutting into his prime rib with surgical precision, "Claire and I were talking earlier about your future plans." "My future plans?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. "Well, you're getting older," Patricia chimed in, not looking up from her phone. "We just want to make sure you're prepared." Claire leaned forward, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she'd perfected as a corporate lawyer. "What David and Patricia are trying to say is that we think it's time to discuss your estate planning. You know, to make sure everything is in order." I set down my fork slowly, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet room. "Everything is in order, dear." "But Mom," David pressed, "we don't even know what you have. How can we help you manage your affairs if we don't know the full scope of your assets?" That's when it hit me. They weren't here to celebrate my 65th birthday. They were here for an audit. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed to check on dessert. But really, I just needed a moment to breathe. Standing in my kitchen, listening to the muffled conversation coming from the dining room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete and utter disappointment in the people I'd given my whole life to. They thought they were being subtle, but I could hear every word. "She's got to have at least 12 million, Claire was saying. "The house alone is worth 2.5, and those rental properties downtown. Don't forget about the stock portfolio," David added. "Dad always said she was smarter with investments than he was." "God, I hope she doesn't leave it all to some charity," Patricia muttered. "I mean, we're her children." I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. These were the same children I'd rocked to sleep, the same ones I'd stayed up all night with when they had fevers, the same ones I'd worked double shifts to put through college. When I returned to the dining room with the lemon cake, I was a different person. The loving mother was still there, but she was sharing space with someone much sharper, much more observant. "This looks delicious, Mom," Claire said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. As I cut the cake, I decided to conduct a little experiment. "You know," I said casually, "I've been thinking about making some changes to my will." The room went dead silent. 3 forks stopped halfway to 3 mouths. "Changes?" David asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Oh, nothing major," I continued, watching their faces. Just some adjustments to make sure my legacy goes to the people who truly deserve it. Patricia's phone clattered to the table. What do you mean, deserve it? Well, sweetie, I want to make sure my assets go to people who actually care about me, not just what I can leave them. Claire's lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. Mom, you can't just arbitrarily decide who deserves what. We're your children. We have a right to... A right to what? Exactly? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. The mask was slipping off all of them now. David leaned forward, his businessman persona in full display. Mom, let's be realistic here. We're your biological children. We're your family. Whatever you have should naturally come to us. Should it? I asked, cutting another slice of cake with deliberate precision. Tell me, David, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask about your trust fund payments, not to check on my investments, but just to talk to your mother? David's face reddened. I'm busy, Mom. I have a business to run. And Claire, I continued, turning to my daughter, when was the last time you visited me without asking to see my financial statements or suggesting I update my will? Claire's composure cracked slightly. I'm looking out for your best interests. And Patricia, I said, facing my youngest, when was the last time you spent time with me without posting about it on social media? When was the last time you asked about my day, my feelings, my life, without somehow steering the conversation toward money? Patricia's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of anger on her cheeks. That's not fair, Mom. We care about you. Do you? I asked, and the question hung in the air like smoke. The three of them exchanged glances, the same calculating looks I'd been seeing for months. It was David who spoke first. Mom, if this is about us not visiting enough, we can change that. But you can't punish us financially for... Punish you? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you think this is about? Claire's lawyer training kicked in again. Mom, you're clearly upset. Maybe we should discuss this when you're feeling more rational. That word, rational, was like a slap across the face. I'd been called many things in my 65 years, but never irrational. I'd built a multi-million-dollar portfolio, raised 3 children mostly on my own after Robert's death, and managed to maintain my independence and dignity through it all. I've never been more rational in my life, I said, standing up from the table. In fact, I think it's time you all learned something about the woman you seem to think you know so well. I walked to my study, my children trailing behind me like vultures following a wounded animal. The room was lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with leather-bound classics and financial journal. My desk, Robert's old desk, sat in the corner, covered with papers and photographs. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the 3 chairs I'd positioned in front of the desk. They complied, but I could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they perched on the edge of their seats like they were ready to pounce. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick folder. Since you're all so interested in my financial affair, I began, I thought you might like to know what I've been doing with my money for the past 5 years. Claire leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean, I said, opening the folder, that while you've all been calculating your inheritance, I've been giving it away. The color drained from David's face. What? I pulled out the first document, a donation receipt from the local children's hospital. $12 million, I said, sliding it across the desk. That's how much I've donated to St. Mary's Children's Hospital over the past 5 years. They're building a new wing. It's going to be called the Robert and Margaret Henderson Family Care Center. Patricia grabbed the paper with shaking hands. 12 million? But that's almost everything. Oh, sweetie, I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. That's just the beginning. I pulled out another receipt. 3 million to the homeless shelter downtown. They're expanding their facilities and starting a job training program. Another receipt. 2 million to the local schools for their arts programs. Another. 1.5 million to the animal rescue, where I volunteer every Tuesday. With each document I produced, my children's faces grew paler. Claire was frantically calculating on her phone. David was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Patricia was crying, her mascara running down her cheeks. But Mom, David whispered, what about us? What about our inheritance? I leaned back in my chair, feeling lighter than I had in years. What about it? You can't just give away our money, Patricia screamed, jumping to her feet. Your money? I stood up slowly, my voice deadly quiet. Your money? Claire tried to regain control of the situation. Mom, what Patricia means is that we expected... I know exactly what you expected, I interrupted. You expected to waltz into my funeral someday and walk away with millions of dollars that you did nothing to earn. You expected to be rewarded for 40 years of taking me for granted. That's not true. true, David protested. Isn't it? I walked around the desk to face them directly. Tell me, David, what's my favorite flower? He stared at me blankly. Claire, what's my favorite book? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Patricia, what's my biggest fear? She just cried harder. You don't know, I said, my voice breaking slightly. You don't know anything about me except what I'm worth financially. You've spent so much time calculating my assets that you forgot to calculate my heart. But I wasn't finished. There was one more thing they needed to know. However, I continued, reaching for another folder. I haven't given everything away. There's still about 3 million left. Hope flickered in their eyes like candles in a storm. And I've decided exactly where it's going. I opened the second folder and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of me at the children's hospital, surrounded by kids in wheelchairs and hospital gowns. Their faces were beaming, and I was reading to them from a colorful storybook. This is Emma, I said, pointing to a little girl with bright eyes and a bald head. She's 8 years old, and she's been fighting leukemia for 2 years. Every Tuesday, when I volunteer at the hospital, she asks me to read her the same story, The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. Do you know why? My children stared at the photograph in silence. Because Emma understands something that you three never learned. She understands that love isn't about what you can get from someone. It's about what you're willing to give. I pulled out another photograph. This one showed me at the animal rescue, covered in mud and dog hair, with a massive German Shepherd mix in my arms. This is Bruno, I continued. He was scheduled to be euthanized because he was too old and too sick for anyone to want him. But I saw something in his eyes, the same thing I used to see in your eyes when you were children. Pure, unconditional love. Patricia was sobbing now, her perfectly styled hair falling around her face. And this, I said, producing a third photograph, is Maria. The picture showed me working in a soup kitchen, ladling food into bowls for a line of homeless people. In the foreground was a woman about my age, her weathered face creased with a genuine smile. Maria has been homeless for 3 years, I explained. She lost her job, then her apartment, then her hope. But every Saturday, when I serve meals at the shelter, she thanks me. Not for the food, for listening to her stories about her grandchildren, for treating her like a human being worth knowing. I set the photographs down and looked at my children, really looked at them, for what I realized might be the last time. Emma, Bruno, and Maria, I said quietly. They're my real heirs, along with about 100 other people who have shown me more love and gratitude in the past 5 years than you three have shown me in the past 20. David found his voice first. Mom, you can't be serious. You can't leave your money to strangers. Strangers? I laughed, but this time there was genuine humor in it. Emma isn't a stranger. She's the little girl who made me a Mother's Day card out of construction paper and popsicle sticks. Bruno isn't a stranger. He's the dog who comforts me when I'm sad and celebrates with me when I'm happy. Maria isn't a stranger. She's the woman who listens to my stories and shares her own, who treats me like a friend instead of a bank account. Claire was frantically flipping through the documents. Mom, this is insane. You can't possibly mean to leave everything to charity cases. Charity cases? My voice rose. These charity cases have taught me more about love, gratitude, and human decency than my own children ever did. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden Robert and I had planted together 20 years ago. The roses were still blooming, their red petals bright against the gray October sky. You want to know what's really sad? I said without turning around. It's not that you're greedy. It's that you've forgotten how to love without expecting something in return. You've forgotten what it means to be family. When I turned back to face them, Patricia was standing near the door, her phone pressed to her ear. Who are you calling? I asked. My lawyer, she said, her voice shaking with rage. This is elder abuse. You're not in your right mind. I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd felt all day. Go ahead, sweetheart. Call your lawyer. But you might want to ask him about the competency evaluation I had done last month. Her phone slowly lowered from her ear. That's right, I continued. I had Dr. Williams, the same psychiatrist who's been treating your family for 15 years, do a full evaluation. Turns out I'm completely competent to make my own decisions about my own money. David was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Mom, what happened to you? What happened to me? I sat back down at my desk, suddenly feeling very tired. I woke up. I realized that the 3 people I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than a retirement plan. I realized that the strangers I'd been helping appreciated me more than my own children did. But we do appreciate you, Claire said, her voice small and desperate. Do you? I asked. Then tell me about my volunteer work at the hospital. Tell me about the book club I joined. Tell me about the pottery classes I've been taking. Tell me about anything I've done in the past 5 years that didn't involve money. Silence. You can't, I said, because you never asked. You never cared about Margaret the person, only Margaret the bank account. I stood up and walked to the door, then turned back to face them one last time. You have a choice to make, I said. You can keep fighting over money that was never yours to begin with, or you can try to rebuild the relationships you've spent years neglecting. But understand this, the money is gone. The question is whether you want to lose your mother, too. As I walked out of the study, leaving my children sitting in stunned silence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. For the first time in decades, I wasn't worried about what my children needed from me. I was thinking about what I needed for myself. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the sounds of my children packing their bags and making angry phone calls, I thought about Emma and her bright smile, about Bruno's loyal brown eyes, about Maria's weathered hands clasped in gratitude. I thought about all the people who had shown me that love didn't have to come with conditions, that gratitude didn't have to come with expectations. My inheritance, my real inheritance, wasn't money. It was the knowledge that I had raised 3 children who had lost their way, but I had also found 100 strangers who had become family. I had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to show their true character. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to choose love over obligation, gratitude over entitlement, and hope over disappointment. Tomorrow I would wake up in a house that felt empty but peaceful. I would drive to the hospital and read to Emma. I would visit Bruno at the rescue. I would serve lunch to Maria and listen to her story. I would do these things not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because that's what real family does. They choose each other again and again. Not because they have to, but because they want to. And if my children ever figured that out, they would always be welcome at my table. But the money was already home, in the hands of people who understood its real value. Not as a number in a bank account, but as a tool for showing love, creating hope, and building the kind of family that transcends blood. After all, the best inheritance isn't what you leave behind. It's what you give while you're still alive to see the joy it brings.